Okay, chapter 14, let's do part 2, federal expenditures. We'll just go through on this little video to page 453. All right, so we're going to work our way through this topic here on federal expenditures. So one thing to note, we've got there big governments, big budgets. Like I said, right now, our national debt is in the trillions, 27 trillion, I think it was. So we're talking about a lot of money. You guys, as you grow up and become adults, you'll probably work to create your own budget, and you will note that it's significantly less zeros, but there's nothing wrong with that. All right, so one of the big changes to note is over time, especially like throughout the 20th century, is the rise of the large government. Okay, this is going to really start, of course, with President Franklin Roosevelt, and the New Deal. Prior to the New Deal, government welfare state was very limited. And when we use that term, we don't just mean like handing out handouts. We mean it, and there's a lot of different meanings to that phrase. So expenditures of the national government, one way that they rank that and determine how much that's growing is what percent of the GDP it is. And GDP stands for gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is all of the products that are made domestically in the United States. There's also an alternative acronym known as the gross national product, and that includes American businesses who may have their factories or whatnot overseas. That's part of the GNP. So they're just looking at the GDP as a kind of reference point for that. So one thing to note is that the United States actually has one of the smallest public sectors among Western nations relative to the size of the GDP. So more Western nations, so we're talking like Britain, France, Spain, Sweden, those countries, they actually spend more proportionally than the United States in proportion to their GDP. All right, so a couple of conditions have led to the growth of the United States government. So one is, let's see, I'm going to go in chronological order here. I hope that makes sense. But one is, of course, the New Deal programs. And the big one that's going to have a major impact on pretty much every American is Social Security Act. So this was passed in 1935, and it was originally intended to provide a minimal level of sustenance to older Americans. So this is something you can put into all your working life. And today they actually tell you should not take Social Security until you're 70 years old. And the longer you can wait to take it, the more that you can get, because they're factoring much longer you'll live and whatnot. So that's something to keep in mind. And you definitely notice that phrase, minimal level of sustenance, so that you do not want that to be your only retirement fund. And when we do a little econ, I'm going to have my financial guy come and talk to you guys a little bit about different ways of investing. And he does a great job. And there's different programs that can help you save money for retirement. Okay, so mid-1960s, America's social services network greatly expanded by adding Social Security system and adding more new programs designed to aid the poor and elderly. So we have Social Security for about 30 years, just kind of this minimal level, and then they started to add in 1965. Just to note, that's under Lyndon Johnson, President Johnson, who was a Democrat, and he assumed the presidency when JFK was killed. But he was a New Deal Democrat. He was a young congressman in the 30s, and he idolized Franklin Roosevelt. So we see a lot of that extension of the New Deal in the 1960s because of Johnson. All right, so one big program that was created in 65 is Medicare. Okay, so Medicare provides both hospital and physician coverage to the elderly. I've got a number here. This is not going to be current because I am referencing your textbook. So 45 million Americans receive payments for Social Security. Yeah, that number is going to be way larger. Again, I encourage you to just do a quick Google or ask me in class if we could do it. That's fine. But that is a really important thing, is the idea Medicare is going to also be a huge part, which is why if you watched any of the debates for the Democrats, they talked about Bernie Sanders wanted something called Medicare for all, while others, including Joe Biden, wanted a private option public option for Medicare. It was an option for Medicare. Excuse me. I'm just trying to remember back. But Biden did not advocate for Medicare for all. So that way, what that means is like if you go to Kaiser, you have private insurance. And so you could keep that into your older years if you want and not be on Medicare, or you could use Medicare to supplement your Kaiser. One thing to note is if you have no medical insurance, of course, things have changed with the advent of Obamacare. That does not mean that everyone has health care. So still we have people who do not have health care. And as my husband will tell me when he goes on those calls in West Sac, they take people to the hospital. And unfortunately, that is covered by the state. So the insurance level aspect of it, getting people preventative care, can seem like a positive thing. But this is one of those topics that some people get really passionate about and others don't care a whole lot about. So we won't go into much more detail, but please ask if you have questions or an opinion on that. I'd love to hear. All right, another reason, let me just kind of go back, is I feel like this is out of order. I just use this from your book. But again, I'm trying to just do things chronologically. Sorry, history teacher for 21 years. But that is the decline of the national security state. So what we mean by that is basically like the military industrial complex that's created after World War II. So of course, all the nuclear technology, and weaponry and things like that. Eisenhower, president from 52 to 60, he coined that phrase, military industrial complex. And this phrase was used to characterize the close relationship between the military hierarchy and the defense industry that supplies its hardware needs. So the military and then like private businesses. So for example, my brother is an aerospace engineer. He works for Northrop Grumman. That is an aerospace company, and they were doing something with like, I want to say F4 jets. I might be on the right track with that. I might not, but it's something like that. So they would develop the jet and then sell it to the military. So that's what they kind of mean by that connection between those two. The military does not do all their own in-house like building of things. All right, I'm being very technical, I know, right there. All right, but one thing to note is that since the Cold War ended, again, the defense expenditures have decreased, like just dropped down. We still have costly expenditures, of course, especially with like new technology and things, but it's definitely has decreased. So that's a huge thing. Okay, now, and I'm sorry, that was a little out of order on my Google Docs here, just making these decisions on the fly. Okay, let's talk for a smidge about incrementalism. Okay, and you've got a definition right there. And of course, any of these bolded words you definitely want to take notes of. So let's go ahead and think about the federal budget as a constant, slow growing kind of thing. Okay, expenditures are going to be mandated by an existing law or obligation like Social Security. That's a great example. And that seems to be the best predictor of that year's budget. Okay, now that is also a hard thing because, for example, we can have things like COVID where things just get blown out, right? The budget just gets blown out. So just keep that in mind. So, slightly different than an uncontrollable expenditure, which is mandated under current law or previous obligation. So what they're saying is that expenditures that are mandated by existing laws or obligations like Social Security are likely to follow a pattern of each year getting a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. So a small little increment. Okay, but as time goes on, we get things mandated, we get things that are harder to plan for. About 2/3 of the budget is uncontrollable, and that, of course, was when your textbook was written. So it's even going to be higher than that. And of course, like this last year with COVID, it's going to be just huge. So many expenditures are uncontrollable because Congress has, in effect, said that they're going to pay this level of benefits, Social Security, Medicare, et cetera, to X amount of people, and those are called entitlements. Okay, so entitlements are things that you are entitled to by Congress. So for some reason, you qualify and you have to qualify for that. Okay, so that's an important difference there. Okay, I'm going to stop here. This one's a little bit shorter. Again, let me know. I don't know if this is helpful, but we're going to go ahead and try it. Okay.